The parking lot of the Ridgemont Youth Center was empty at 10:47 on a Wednesday night, except for one car, a 2009 Honda Accord with a cracked passenger side mirror and a street Christopher medal hanging from the rear view. Daniel Reyes sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the heat going nowhere because the heat hadn't worked since February. His hands were on the steering wheel. He wasn't holding it the way you hold something when you're about to drive. He was holding it the way you hold something when you have nothing else to hold. He had been sitting there for 22 minutes. Inside the youth center, through the double glass doors, he could see from where he was parked, the overhead fluorescents were still on over the gymnasium. He had come to volunteer. He had come because his caseworker, a woman named Patricia Chun, who had the specific exhaustion of someone who cared about her job too much to leave it, had told him that service work helped. That structure helped. That being around people, even people you didn't know, was better than being alone in a two-room apartment with the television on. He had sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes, and he had not gone inside. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was 34 years old. He had been a structural engineer at Callaway Brandt Partners for 9 years, had made senior associate at 31, and had left the firm 18 months ago in the particular way that people leave things when the reason for staying has been removed. His wife, Camille, had been killed on the I-91 overpass on a Tuesday in October when a semi drifted lanes in the rain. She had been 32. They had been married for 4 years. They had not had children, which at the time had felt like something still ahead of them, like a door not yet opened, and which now felt like the specific and permanent weight of something that would never be. He had gone back to work 6 months after the accident, because Patricia Chun had told him to, and because she was right. He had lasted 4 months before he couldn't make himself care about load-bearing calculations or client presentations or the Tuesday afternoon team meetings that Callaway Brandt held in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor. His manager, a man named Gordon Pierce, had been patient in the way that people are patient when they are managing the clock on their own patience. The day Daniel turned in his badge, Gordon had shaken his hand and said it was the right call, and Daniel had believed him because he had no energy left for doubt. That was 7 months ago. He was living on savings and the settlement from the accident. He was seeing Patricia Chun every 2 weeks. He was eating meals that came in packages that went directly from the microwave to the couch. He was sleeping in increments, not sleeping through, and he was sitting in the parking lot of the Ridgemont Youth Center at 10:47 on a Wednesday night, not going inside. He closed his eyes. The steering wheel was cool under his palms. He thought, as he had been thinking for several months, that he was doing a poor job of being alive without Camille in the world. Not in a way that frightened him, just in a flat, factual way that some math doesn't balance. The knock on the passenger window was 3 sharp raps, the kind made by small knuckles. Daniel opened his eyes. There was a boy standing beside the car. He was 7 years old, possibly 8, slight in the way of children who have grown fast in the legs, but not yet through the shoulders. He was wearing a gray hoodie, 2 sizes large, and sneakers that lit up at the heel when he shifted his weight, which he did now, left to right, the red lights pulsing at intervals in the dark parking lot. He had a backpack on. He was alone. He was looking directly at Daniel through the window with an expression that was not frightened and not uncertain. It was the expression of someone who had made a decision and was executing it. Daniel lowered the window. The boy said, "Are you my dad?" The question arrived the way certain questions arrive, without warning, without context, and with a weight that the words themselves did not seem large enough to carry. Daniel looked at the boy. The boy looked back. The red lights in his sneakers pulsed twice. "No," Daniel said. "I'm not." The boy processed this. He did not appear devastated by the information. He appeared to be updating. "Are you sure?" he said. "I'm sure." The boy looked at him for another moment, then looked at the youth center, then back at Daniel. "Were you going inside?" "I was thinking about it." "Mr. Carl locks up at 11, the boy said. "You should probably go now." Daniel looked at the youth center. He looked at the boy. He looked at the parking lot, which was empty in every direction. "Where's your family?" he said. The boy's expression shifted by something small. "My grandma was supposed to come at 10. She didn't come yet." Daniel checked the clock on the dashboard. 10:49. "Have you called her?" "My phone is dead." "What's your name?" The boy said, "Marco." "Marco, I'm Daniel. Do you want to wait inside while I try to reach your grandmother? Marco looked at him. The hoodie was too big, and when he looked up, the hood slid back slightly, and Daniel could see that his hair was cut short on the sides and longer at the top, slightly unkempt in the back the way hair gets when no one has trimmed it recently. He had a small scar at the corner of his left eyebrow, fine and pale, an old one. You're not a volunteer, Marco said. I know all the volunteers. I was going to start tonight. Marco considered this with the thoroughness of someone conducting a review. What do you do? I'm an engineer. What kind? Structural. Buildings, bridges. How things hold together. Marco nodded slowly, as though this were adequate. Okay, he said. You can come inside. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The youth center's main room smelled of floor wax and old gym equipment and the particular warmth of a space that had been occupied for many hours. A folding table near the entrance held a sign-in sheet and a basket of lanyards. A man in his 60s with a silver beard and a polo shirt that read Ridgemont Youth Center in block letters across the chest was stacking chairs near the far wall. He looked up when the doors opened. Marco, he said, your grandma's on her way. 20 minutes, she said. He looked at Daniel. You the new volunteer? Daniel Reyes? Yes. Carl Obi. He crossed the room and shook Daniel's hand with the grip of a man who had spent decades shaking hands with people who needed to be made to feel welcome. We matched you with our Tuesday and Wednesday evening program. Homework help mostly. Some of our kids need more time than the school day allows. Tonight was observation only, I thought. Tonight is whatever you make it. Carl looked at Marco, who had set his backpack on the folding table and was pulling out a worksheet. Marco's been here since 4. His grandmother's schedule runs late sometimes. Marco spread the worksheet flat and looked at Daniel. I have fractions, he said. If you're an engineer, you probably know fractions. Daniel pulled out one of the folding chairs and sat down across from him. He looked at the worksheet. Grade 3 fractions, equivalent denominators. I know fractions, he said. Marco pushed the sheet across the table. They worked through the worksheet for 35 minutes. Marco was methodical and precise, and he did not guess. When he was uncertain, he said he was uncertain. When he got something wrong and Daniel showed him the correction, he repeated the process himself from the top without being told to, which was not something most adults did. Twice he asked questions that were not on the worksheet, about why denominators had to match and whether that was a rule someone invented or a rule that was true by itself. Daniel answered them, and Marco listened, and the answer about why denominators had to match went on for longer than the worksheet required, because Marco kept asking the follow-up. At 11:15, a woman appeared at the glass doors. She was in her late 60s, wearing a winter coat and moving with the slightly breathless energy of someone who had been running behind all day. Marco looked up, registered her presence, and began packing his backpack with the unhurried efficiency of a person who had done this routine many times. Grandma Rosa, he said, by way of introduction to Daniel. Rosa came through the doors apologizing before she was fully inside, in Spanish, and then English to Carl, to the room, to Marco. Marco accepted the apology with a patience that suggested he had learned not to make the lateness into something larger than it was. At the door, Marco stopped. He looked back at Daniel, who was still sitting at the folding table. You'll be here Tuesday? Marco said. I'll be here Tuesday. Marco nodded. The red lights in his sneakers pulsed once as he turned. Then he was through the door, and Rosa's voice faded into the parking lot, and the glass doors closed. Carl began turning off the fluorescents one bank at a time. He does that, he said, not looking at Daniel. Asks questions that take you somewhere you weren't planning to go. Daniel folded the sign-in sheet and set it in the basket. He asked me if I was his father, he said, in the parking lot, before I came in. Carl paused with his hand on the light switch. He does that too, he said. Often. Carl was quiet for a moment. His mother left when he was 4. His father has never been in the picture. His grandmother raises him, and she does a good job with the resources she has. But Marco has this thing where he'll look at a man who's sitting alone somewhere, and he'll go up and ask. Carl turned off the last bank of lights. The room went to the dim overflow from the parking lot. Most people find it strange and move on. What do they say to him? Most of them say no and don't ask anything back. Daniel picked up his jacket from the chair. He stood in the half-dark of the empty gym and thought about a 7-year-old boy asking a man sitting alone in a parking lot if he was his father, and about what it takes to ask that question, and about what kind of person asks it without fear. He drove home on the I-91 alternate route he had taken every night since October 2 years ago. The city lights sat above the overpass in a low orange spread. The roads were clear. The Honda's heaters still did not work, but he had stopped noticing. In his apartment, he made tea he did not finish and sat at the kitchen table for a while. Camille had kept a yellow notepad on the kitchen table. She made lists on it, grocery lists, things to call about, ideas for the apartment they had been saving to buy. The pad was still there, her handwriting still visible on the top sheet, the indentation of it on the sheets below. He had not thrown it away. He did not know if that was a good sign or a bad one, and had stopped asking himself. He thought about fractions, about why denominators had to match, about a rule that was not invented, but was simply true. On Tuesday, he arrived at the youth center at 5:30. Marco was already there, at the same folding table, with a different worksheet. He looked up when Daniel came through the door and returned to the worksheet without ceremony, which meant Daniel was learning that the greeting had been given. Over the next 3 weeks, Tuesday and Wednesday evenings, Daniel learned the following things about Marco. He was 7 years and 4 months old. His full name was Marco Elliott Vega. He was in 3rd grade at Ridgemont Elementary, where his teacher was a woman named Ms. Hargrove who he liked because she did not repeat herself. He had 3 things he carried in his backpack at all times: a calculator that did not require batteries, a small notebook with a red cover in which he drew floor plans of buildings he had not been inside, and a photograph, laminated, of a man Daniel had not asked about. He ate the same lunch every day because Rosa made it and routine was efficient. He wanted to be an architect when he grew up, which he had decided at age 5 after watching a documentary about Antoni Gaudí on his grandmother's television, and he had not reconsidered this since. He was relentless with questions, and the questions were always genuine. He did not ask things to seem curious. He asked because he wanted the answer. He wanted it precisely, and he would follow a single question down through as many levels as the answer had. The evening of the 3rd Wednesday, while Marco was working and Daniel was checking his own notes on the youth center's after-school program calendar, Marco said, without looking up from his work, "Why do you always sit in your car before you come in?" Daniel looked at him. "I saw you the first night," Marco said. "And last Tuesday. You sit for a while before you come in." "I'm getting ready," Daniel said. Marco considered this. For what? It was a reasonable question. Daniel thought about answering it the way adults typically answer inconvenient questions from children, with something technically true and sufficiently vague. He found he did not want to do that. Marco did not deal in vague. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said. "Being around people is something I have to work up to." Marco was quiet for a moment. He set his pencil down. He looked at Daniel with the measuring quality that had been in his face that first night in the parking lot. "She died. Yes. Do you miss her?" "Every day." Marco picked up his pencil again. He returned to the worksheet. After a moment, he said, "My grandma says missing someone means they were worth having." Daniel did not answer. The fluorescents hummed above them. Down the hall, Cora was talking to one of the other volunteers, something about scheduling. Marco worked through 2 more fractions and then stopped. "The man in the photograph in my backpack," he said. He did not look up. "I don't know who he is. My grandma found it with my mom's things. She thinks it might be my dad." He paused. "I look for him. In places. Men sitting alone." He said it without self-pity. The same tone he used to describe the Gaudí documentary, or the rule about denominators, or the fact that Rosa's schedule ran late sometimes. Just information, plainly stated. Daniel looked at Marco's hands on the worksheet. Small hands, the pencil held slightly too tight, the way children hold pencils before the grip has been drilled out of them. "Has Rosa tried to find out who he is?" Daniel said. "She tried. She doesn't know how to look in the right places." Daniel said, "I might know how to help with that." Marco looked up. "I'm not promising anything," Daniel said, "but I know some people who are good at finding things. If your grandmother is willing, I can ask." Marco held his gaze for a long beat. Then he said, "Okay." He went back to the worksheet. Then he said, "You're good at fractions." "It's the engineering." "I know," Marco said. "You told me." The next Tuesday, Daniel arrived at the youth center 20 minutes earlier than usual. He parked in the same spot, turned off the engine, and did not sit in the car. He got out, walked across the parking lot, and went inside. Carl looked up from the sign-in table. "Early tonight," Carl said. "I have some things to get started on," Daniel said. He had spent the previous 4 days making calls. He had a friend from his Callaway Brandt years, a man named Hector Vidal, who had left structural engineering to go to law school and was now working family court in Hartford. Hector had given him the name of a social worker who specialized in paternity cases. The social worker had given him a list of what would be required for a search, and Daniel had written everything down on the yellow notepad with the indentation of Camille's handwriting still pressed into the pages below. One photograph, one name if known, Rosa's cooperation, Marco's birth record, which Rosa had. It was not nothing. It was a beginning. Marco arrived at 5 with his backpack and his red-covered notebook and his calculator. He sat down. He did not ask about the search. He pulled out a new worksheet and a word problem about a building with 6 floors and varying load capacities, which he placed in front of Daniel, as though he had been saving it specifically. "Can engineers help with this one?" he said. Daniel looked at the problem. "Engineers invented this one," he said. Marco put his pencil to the paper. The red lights in his sneakers had stopped lighting up, the battery finally gone, but he had not mentioned it, and Daniel had not asked, and they worked through the word problem floor by floor in the particular quiet of 2 people who have found a rhythm and are not in a hurry to break it. What Daniel did not know, and would not know for another 10 days, was that the photograph in Marco's backpack, the laminated one, showed a man standing in front of the building. The building was identifiable. It was the Callaway Brandt Partners building on Harrison Street, downtown Hartford, photographed from the exterior on a summer day with the light coming in at an angle that made the glass facade go warm. And the man standing in front of it, squinting slightly into that same light, was 26 years old in the photograph, wearing a hard hat he had clearly just taken off because it was hanging from his hand, and he had the look of someone who had just finished something he was proud of. The man was not Daniel. But the building was one that Daniel had worked on for 3 years, from foundation design through the final structural sign-off, and he knew every load-bearing element of it by memory. And the photograph had been taken in the summer of the same year that Daniel had joined the Callaway Brandt team as a junior associate. And the man in the photograph, whose name Marco did not know and Rosa did not know, had worked on that building too. None of this was known yet. What was known was that a 7-year-old boy with a red notebook full of floor plans came to the Ridgemont Youth Center 4 days a week and asked questions that took you somewhere you hadn't planned to go, and that a man who had been sitting alone in a parking lot at 10:47 on a Wednesday night had come inside. That was the beginning. The rest would arrive in its own time, the way things that have been waiting always do. The social worker's name was Diane Marsh, and she worked out of a beige office on the 2nd floor of the Hartford Family Services building with a window that looked directly into the side wall of the parking garage next door. She had the manner of someone who had heard a great many difficult stories and had learned that the most useful thing she could do was listen without arranging her face into sympathy. Sympathy, she had found, made people perform their pain for you. Attention made them tell the truth. She looked at the photograph Rosa had provided. It was the laminated one from Marco's backpack, which Rosa had brought in a Ziploc bag as though it required handling. Diane sat on the desk and looked at it without picking it up. "The building in the background," she said. "You know which one this is?" Rosa was seated across from her. She had come with a folder of papers that she had organized carefully: Marco's birth certificate, his school records, 2 letters from his pediatrician. She had the look of a woman who had been thorough about everything within her control, because too many things had been outside it. Daniel was sitting to Rosa's left. He had come because Rosa had asked him to, in the particular way that people who are not used to asking ask, carefully, as though they expect to be declined. He had said yes before she finished the sentence. "I know which building it is," he said. "I worked there for 3 years. It's Callaway Brandt's Harrison Street development. Finished in 2015. Diane looked at him. "You were on the construction team?" "Structural engineering. I came on in 2014 when the foundation phase was complete." "Who else was on the team at that stage?" Daniel had spent 2 evenings the week before going through his files. He still had them, 3 binders from the Harrison Street project, the kind of documentation that accumulates on a multi-year build and that he had never thrown out because engineers do not throw out documentation. In those binders were sign-in sheets from site visits, team rosters, subcontractor records, correspondence logs. He slid a printed page across Diane's desk. It was a site roster from the summer of 2014, the period that matched the photograph based on the angle and quality of the light and the stage of the building's exterior visible in the background. Diane scanned the page. 47 names, she said. I've cross-referenced against Marco's birth record. He was born in April of 2017. That means his father would have been on site in roughly the summer of 2016 at the latest. I pulled the rosters for 2014 through 2016. There are 11 men who appear consistently across that period and who were the right age range. Diane looked at him. Rosa looked at him. He had not told either of them how much time he had spent on this. It did not seem relevant. You did this yourself, Diane said. I had the files, Daniel said. Diane picked up the photograph again and held it at a slight angle under the desk lamp. The man in the image was standing in a relaxed posture, weight on his back foot, the hard hat held loose at his side. Not posed, caught, more like the way candid photographs catch people when they are not managing how they look. There was something in the face that Diane was considering. The build of him, she said. The way he's standing. Is there anyone on your list of 11 who looks like this? Daniel had thought about this. He had gone through the site roster photos, the ones attached to visitor badges and safety certifications, and had narrowed his list to 4. He placed 4 printed photographs on the desk, each one a headshot from a site certification record. Rosa leaned forward. She looked at each one. She was very still. Then she pointed. Her finger rested on the second photograph from the left. Daniel looked at it. He recognized the face, though it took him a moment to place it because the certification photo was 7 years old and people change. The name on the record beneath the photograph was Tomas Vega, not a name Daniel had known well. A subcontractor, mechanical systems, brought in during the second year of the build and gone before the final walkthrough. They had exchanged maybe a dozen words on site. Daniel had the impression of a man who worked fast and quietly and did not require managing. Tomas Vega, the same last name as Marco. Rosa's hand had not moved from the photograph. She said something in Spanish, quietly, not to anyone in the room. Then she said, in English, his mother never told me a name. She said she didn't know him well. That was a short time. She paused, but she kept the photograph. Diane was writing. She wrote for a moment without speaking. Then she said, I'll need 2 to 3 weeks to run the formal search. If he's in the system, tax records, professional licensing, anything, we'll find him. She looked at Daniel. The roster documentation is helpful. This is more than most people bring in. Daniel gathered the papers from the desk and returned them to the folder. Rosa was still looking at the photograph of Tomas Vega, the way she had been looking at it since she pointed, as though she needed to memorize it before it was taken away. On the drive back to Ridgemont, Rosa sat in the passenger seat with the folder on her lap and said nothing for several miles. Then she said, Why are you helping us? Daniel thought about the honest answer. Marco knocked on my window, he said. Nobody's done that for a while. Rosa looked out the passenger window. The city went past, brick and concrete, and the particular gray of late November. He does that to men who are sitting alone, she said. I've told him not to. It isn't safe. She paused. He doesn't stop. I know, Daniel said. He says he's looking for his father. Her voice was level when she said it, the level of someone who has made peace with something difficult by saying it plainly many times. I tell him we don't know if his father is someone worth finding. He says everyone is worth looking for until you know they aren't. Daniel said nothing. The traffic slowed at the intersection of Main and Prospect. The lights sat red for a long beat. He's right about that, Daniel said. That evening Daniel went to the youth center. Marco was at the folding table with the red notebook, not a worksheet, just a notebook, open to a page of floor plans. Columns of rooms in neat pencil lines. Dimensions noted in the margins in a handwriting that was too small for a third grader's hand. Daniel sat down and looked at the page. What building is this? He said. I made it up, Marco said. It's a house. This is the kitchen. This is a room for working in. This is a room with big windows because I want to see outside. He pointed to each space in turn. This is where the stairs go. I put the stairs in the middle so they're easy to get to from everywhere. Central circulation, Daniel said. That's a real architectural principle. Marco looked at him. I know, he said. I read about it. Daniel looked at the floor plan for a long time. The proportions were off in the way that self-taught plans are always off. The rooms slightly too large or too small relative to each other. The walls drawn at varying thicknesses. But the logic was there. The thinking was there. The stairs were in the middle because Marco had reasoned his way to the correct conclusion without being told. Can I show you something? Daniel said. He took a blank sheet from the worksheet pile and drew a quick plan beside Marco's. He put the same rooms in roughly the same positions. Then he drew the load-bearing walls with a double line and showed Marco where the structure lived, which walls held weight, and which were just dividers. Marco watched without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Marco took his red notebook and redrew his own plan from scratch, incorporating the double-line distinction, his tongue pressed slightly against his teeth in concentration. It took him 11 minutes. The second version was noticeably better than the first. Now I know which walls matter, Marco said. Now you know which walls matter, Daniel said. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Diane Marsh called 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning. Daniel was at the kitchen table with coffee and the yellow notepad, going through the youth center's equipment request form that Carl had asked him to look at. The call came through at 8:14. Tomas Vega was alive. He was 38 years old. He was living in Providence, Rhode Island, where he ran a small mechanical contracting firm he had built over the past 6 years. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants. He had been married once, briefly, and divorced. No other children on record. Diane had made contact, carefully, the way these contacts are made, without pressure and with clear information. She had told him about Marco. She had told him about Rosa. She had told him that there was a child who might be his son and that a paternity confirmation was all that was needed to establish the fact legally. He had not hung up. He had asked questions. How old? What was the mother's name? Was the child healthy? What did he look like? He had asked to think about it. Diane had said he could have 2 weeks. She had not said it with judgment. 2 weeks was reasonable. This was not a small thing to be told. Daniel put the phone down on the table and sat with it for a moment. Then he picked up the yellow notepad and wrote the name Tomas Vega at the top of a clean page, and below it wrote the date, and below that wrote alive, Providence, 2 weeks. He sat with the notepad for another moment before he put it back on the table. He went to the youth center that evening. Marco was there. They worked through a geometry problem involving triangles, and then Marco drew 3 new floor plans in his notebook, faster than usual, the way he drew when something was going well. At the end of the session, when Rosa arrived on time for once and Marco was packing his backpack, Daniel said, I have some news about the search. I'll tell you and your grandmother together when you're ready. Marco looked at him. He held his backpack by one strap. The scar at the corner of his eyebrow caught the light. Is it good news? Marco said. I don't know yet, Daniel said. It's real news. That's something. Marco thought about this. Then he said, okay, and went to Rosa, and the two of them left together, and Daniel sat at the folding table for a few minutes after the lights started going down. He was thinking about the word real, about the difference between real news and good news, and how sometimes real is all you can offer, and that if the person receiving it is honest with themselves, it is usually enough. He drove home on the alternate route. He passed the overpass. He went up to his apartment and stood in the kitchen for a while, and then sat down at the table with the yellow notepad and read what he had written. He had filled 4 pages over the past several weeks. Contacts, dates, details about the search, notes from his calls with Hector, observations about the youth center's equipment needs, a sketch he had made of the Harrison Street building from memory to check his own recollection against the photograph. For pages in Camille's notepad, his handwriting pressed into paper that still held the indentation of hers. He put his hand flat on the page. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. He thought about Marco at the folding table, redriving his floor plan, the tongue pressed against his teeth, the pencil making the walls heavier where they needed to be heavier. He thought about a boy who looked for his father in parking lots, because everyone is worth looking for until you know they aren't. He thought about a man in a photograph standing in front of a building Daniel had spent 3 years of his life on, squinting in a summer light, a hard hat held loose at his side. He thought about Camille. He thought about the door they had not yet opened, the one they had assumed was still ahead of them. He thought about how a closed door and a locked door are different things, and how sometimes a person goes looking for one and finds instead that the other is simply waiting for someone to reach for the handle. He did not have an answer for what came next. He had a name. He had a city. He had 2 weeks. He had a boy who had knocked on his window in a dark parking lot and asked him a question he had not been prepared for, and who had not been disappointed by the answer, and who had sat down across a folding table anyway and pushed a worksheet about fractions across the surface, as though the refusal of one thing did not preclude the offering of another. Daniel turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He slept through. It was the first night in 7 months he had slept through, and he did not note at the time because he was asleep. He would remember it later as the night things began to shift, not dramatically, not with announcement, but the way weight shifts when you change where you're standing. The center of gravity, finding a new location. Quiet, incremental, irrevocable. The call from Diane came on a Thursday morning, 9 days into the 2 weeks she had given Tomas Vega. He had not waited the full 2 weeks. He said yes. He said he wanted to meet Marco. He said he understood if Rosa needed to be present and if it needed to happen slowly and if there were conditions. He said he had no conditions of his own except one. He wanted to know if the boy was all right. Diane called Daniel because Daniel had been the one who brought the documentation and because Rosa had given permission to include him in updates and because in Diane's experience, people who built careful folders and did thorough research and showed up to support meetings for families they had known for 3 weeks were usually safe to keep in the loop. He said yes, she told Daniel. He wants to meet him. Daniel was standing at the window of his apartment. The street below was wet from a morning rain, the pavement dark, the parked cars beaded with water. "Does Marco know he found someone?" he said. Rosa told him last night. She said he asked 2 questions. First, does he seem like a good person? She told him we don't know yet. Second question was whether you were going to be there when they met. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What did Rosa say? She said she'd ask you. Daniel looked at the wet street. He thought about Marco's 2 questions and about the order in which he had asked them. Does he seem like a good person? First, are you going to be there? Second, not the other way around. The priorities exactly as they should be, with the secondaries still worth asking. Tell Rosa yes, Daniel said. I'll be there. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks out, at a neutral location Diane had recommended, a family services conference room with good chairs and a window, and nothing on the walls that could be interpreted as belonging to any side of anything. Rosa agreed. Tomas agreed, from Providence through Diane's relay. Marco was told on a Tuesday evening at the folding table by Rosa, while Daniel sat slightly to the side in the manner of someone present but not central. Rosa had asked him to be there for this conversation too. He had come. Rosa told Marco that they had found a man who might be his father, that the man lived in another city but was coming to meet him, that they would take a test first to know for certain, and that the test was simple, just a swab inside the cheek, nothing that hurt. Marco listened to all of it without interrupting. When Rosa finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What's his name?" "Tomas," Rosa said. "Tomas Vega." Marco said the name once, quietly, the way you say a word you're hearing for the first time and want to hear how it sounds. Then he opened his red notebook. He turned to the floor plan with the central staircase, the one he had redrawn after Daniel showed him which walls carried weight. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up at Daniel. "Do you think he'll want to see my drawings?" Marco said. Daniel looked at him. The fluorescents hummed. Down the hall, Carl was locking the equipment closet. "I think," Daniel said, "that's probably the best thing you could show him." Marco nodded. He closed the notebook. He put it in his backpack, in the front pocket, where the laminated photograph had always been. He zipped the pocket closed. Rosa was watching her grandson with her hands folded on the table, And her expression was the expression of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and can feel, for the first time, its weight beginning to distribute. Daniel drove home on the alternate route. He passed the overpass. The city lights sat warm above it in the November dark. He pulled into his parking spot, turned off the engine, and did not sit in the car. He got out, went upstairs, and stood in the kitchen for a moment. He picked up the yellow notepad. He turned to the page where he had written Tomas Vega, Providence, 2 weeks. He drew a single line under it, not an ending, a marker, the place where one thing finishes and another begins. He set the notepad down and went to make tea. He would actually finish this time. Outside, the city went on. November sharpened toward December. The youth center had 17 kids enrolled in the after-school program, and a broken projector Carl had been meaning to replace since September. And on Tuesday and Wednesday evenings, a structural engineer sat at a folding table near the entrance going through load-bearing principles with a 7-year-old who asked questions that took you somewhere you hadn't planned to go. 2 weeks. The Saturday was coming. What would happen in that room? Daniel did not yet know. He knew only what he had learned in the parking lot, in the gym, at the folding table, from a boy who did not perform his searching and did not apologize for it. Sometimes the most important question is not the one that gets answered. Sometimes it is the one that gets asked in the right place at the right time by the right person to a man sitting alone in the dark. Are you my dad? The answer had been no, but the question had opened a door that neither of them had known was there. And now, on the other side of it, the shape of something real was beginning to take form. The Saturday came. Tomas walked in quietly, sat across from Marco, and looked at his son's face for a long time without speaking. Marco opened his red notebook and pushed it across the table. Tomas looked at the floor plans. He turned each page slowly. When he reached the one with the central staircase, he stopped. "You put the stairs in the middle," he said. "So everyone can get there," Marco said. Tomas nodded. His eyes were red at the edges. After the meeting, Daniel sat in the parking lot. He did not stay long. He got out. He went inside. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.